SEP Fanfic Readings presents What the Room Requires by Alydia Rackham. Chapter 11, Day 5, Draco. I opened my eyes. I blinked once, then I jerked to a sitting position. I stared at my ankle. I had kicked off the ice packs during the night, and my bare foot lay on the white pillow. My perfectly normal-looking foot. My brow furrowed as I risked raising my leg up and rolling on my ankle this way, then that. It didn't hurt. At all. I looked over at Hermione, who lay asleep on her side a little way away, facing me. Perhaps there was something to that ice theory. I would never tell her that, of course. I pulled my foot closer to myself and felt it with my thumbs, pressing down on the top of my foot. I explored the place where it had hurt the most, the center bone I'd been certain was broken. But it wasn't. Not now, anyway. For a long while I sat there, staring at my foot and my ankle. Then I reached for my sock, pulled it on, put on the shoe and tied it. Then I got up, the blue blanket tumbling off me. I glanced down. I felt quite warm. Not hot, but warm, inside me. Like I'd felt when I used to sleep by the fireplace at home. Hermione, however, looked chilled. She had her knees pulled up to her chest and her arms tucked in. I considered the blanket again, then picked it up and tossed it over her. Why not? I didn't need it. She took a breath, her brow tightened, and then she reached up and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. For a moment, I just watched her, and then turned and pushed the willow curtain out of the way, and set out to test my newly healed ankle in the cool air before the dawn. Draco. It was broad daylight, mid-morning, and I was pacing experimentally back and forth outside the willow when Hermione emerged. She rubbed her face as soon as she stepped out of the curtain, and the wind caught her hair and tossed it. Then she opened her eyes, saw me, and stared. Her mouth fell open. "What? You're walking!" "Good observation," I remarked, though I didn't feel like biting at her. Then I hopped straight up in the air as high as I could, landing easily, and grinned out at the field. "I feel fantastic!" Hermione stepped towards me, staring down at my feet, an amazed, open-mouthed smile spreading across her face. "That's incredible!" she laughed. I can't believe it." "Me either," I confessed. I was quite certain it was broken. I turned away from her so she couldn't see my face. But I suppose it wasn't. "Oh no, it looked broken to me," Hermione said, coming closer, still glancing between my face and my foot. "And even if it was only swollen, ice wouldn't have made it better so quickly." "What are you suggesting, then?" I frowned at her. She shrugged, raised her eyebrows, and shook her head. "Magic?" I snorted, laughing. "Brilliant," I said again, though not as darkly as before. I guess it makes sense, if it was only an imaginary injury in the first place. "I suppose," Hermione said. I glanced at her, and my smile faded. She was frowning, and her eyes were unfocused. She was trying to figure it out. I swallowed as a thought entered my head I'd been trying to avoid, one that I would not be sharing with her. I knew she'd sung to me last night, and I'd seen the golden lights before I fell asleep. Had the song done it just like my song had made her upset? Had it healed my foot? I turned away and started to walk, putting my hands in my pockets. "Where are you going?" Hermione called. "I will be walking on my wonderfully healed foot this morning," I called back. "Come on." As soon as it fell out of my mouth, my eyes went wide and my heart gave a thud. What had I just said? Apparently she was experiencing the same shock and confusion, because I heard nothing from her. My face got hot, and I did not turn around. Then running footsteps crashed through the grass, and she blustered up beside me. She glanced over at me, gave a halfway breathless smile, and just fell into step. I clenched my jaw and avoided looking at her. But for some reason, that warm feeling inside me would not allow me to keep that Scrooge-like expression on my face. And before I knew it, I lifted my head, relaxed my shoulders, and took a deep breath of the morning wind. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Hermione do the same. And in that moment, something inside my chest released, like a knot being untied. I no longer quite wished that she would just go away and leave me alone. But then again, I would never tell her that. Draco. "This reminds me so much of late summer holiday," Hermione observed, gazing upward. "Just about the time when school is about to begin," she sighed. "I always get so excited this time of year." I had been busy hurtling over bunches of barley that stood higher than the rest, getting a thrill out of how solid my ankle and knees felt. When I leaped, they felt better than they ever had, actually. I jumped over one more strand and landed with a crunch as my shoe heels hit the crisp grass. You're mad, I said. Why would you get excited about going back to school? I don't know. I've always liked it, Hermione said lightly, snapping off a bit of barley and twirling it between her fingers as she strolled. Of course, if you'd been used to sitting in a boring classroom doing nothing but sums and grammar all day, then you'd suddenly switch to charms and potions. You'd be excited too. I looked at her incredulously. That's what Muggle school is like? She nodded. I rolled my eyes. I'd kill myself. She laughed. I do like summer holiday, though. Don't get me wrong. What is there not to like? I asked, hopping over another bunch of waving grass. Not half as many rules. You get to stay up late, eat whatever you want, do whatever you want. There's no homework and no divination class. That really made her laugh, and I smirked because I was right. True, definitely true, she confessed. Trelawney can be an adventure. Yeah, an adventure in snoring, I muttered. What do you do in the summer? She asked. I was concentrating, squinting ahead of me at the very tall strand of barley, gauging whether or not I could make it over the top if I took a running leap. So I answered her absently. My father and I go to Quidditch matches. I accompany Mother as she does her annual shopping and redecorating of the entire first floor of the house. I thought a moment. We have my birthday party in June. We travel some. Where do you go? Hermione asked. I shrugged, set myself, took 3 running steps forward, jumped, and cleared that tall patch. When I landed, I ran my hand through my hair and glanced up at the white cloud in front of us. Oh, Italy, some random places in Russia, Egypt, France, Denmark. I'm jealous, Hermione said. I've not gotten to travel much. I shrugged again. Of course you haven't. Hermione was still for a moment. I thought she would be quiet after that, and she surprised me by going, Furthest away we usually go is the center of London, though sometimes we visit my grandparents out in the country. They live in Wiltshire. I faced her. Wiltshire? Yes, she nodded. That's where my house is. Really? She cried. I've never seen it. You can't, I said. We hide it. Oh. I kept walking, pulling up an entire stalk this time and whipping it back and forth, up and down. My grandparents live in an old farmhouse, stone with a silo, Hermione said, kicking at a few stalks. It's usually very windy out there. Like here. She lifted her face toward the sky. This is an incredible wind. It's a pity we don't have a kite. I paused. A what? A kite, she repeated. You know. I waited. She laughed and shook her head. You have flying brooms, yet you don't know what a kite is? I glared at her. If we're going to start to insult each other... No, no. She held up a hand, still smirking. A kite is a piece of large paper or canvas attached to a string. You hold on to the string and throw the kite up into the air. The wind catches it and takes it up into the air. Her smile grew as she gazed off, walking and remembering. My grandfather and I would always fly a kite. He loved that song from Mary Poppins, so when we would pull the kite out of the closet, he made me skip to the door with it, and out into the yard singing that song. She laughed harder now, shaking her head, but I didn't know what the kite song was. I pried the top of the stalk off and twisted it in my hands. You know the song I mean, she said, leaning around to look at me. Don't you? You've seen Mary Poppins. Of course not, I said scornfully. Why would I? Ha! She almost mocked. Well, because it's about a magical nanny. A nanny who doesn't even need a wand to cast spells. I looked at her sideways. This is a muggle book? Yes, and a film, too, she said. A musical. With a kite song, I finished. Yes? Okay. I raised my eyebrows at her. She stopped. What? What's the kite song? I asked, assuming it was some sort of incantation. She gave me a sheepish look. You want me to sing it? I glanced around, then held out my hands. You can't make fun of my ignorance and then refuse to tell me what you're laughing about. She blushed and glanced away, then cleared her throat. Well, she took a breath. With tuppence and paper and strings, you can have your own set of wings. She began shakily, glanced at me, turning red. I grinned, loving the fact that she was uncomfortable. I stopped, folded my arms, and canted my head. Go on. She swallowed again. With your feet on the ground, you're a bird in flight. With your fist holding tight to the string of your kite. Suddenly, she strode out, past me, throwing me off balance, and her voice grew braver. Oh, let's go fly a kite up to the highest height. Let's go fly a kite and send it soaring. She swung her arms, and I had to trot to keep up with her. She let her voice ring out over the field, and I suddenly pang. She was right in the middle of a memory with her grandfather. Up through the atmosphere, up where the air is clear. Oh, let's go. I jerked to a halt as my foot landed on something wooden. She stopped and spun around. I leaped back when I saw what it was. It was the red door in the ground. I drew back even further, glaring at the thing. The door! Hermione cried, coming up beside me. My dark look deepened. Aren't you going to open it? She pressed. Why? I growled. Because there was a chessboard inside last time. No, last time I broke my foot. It isn't going to bite you. I met her eyes. Oh, really? How do you know? She sighed, bent down, and grasped the handle and pulled. Hinges squeaked, light flooded in. Down below, inside the wooden cavity, sat a diamond-shaped piece of green canvas with two thin wooden bars to the shape of a cross in the center, forming a frame for the diamond canvas. Hermione reached down inside and picked it up. A long, wide piece of ribbon trailed from the bottom of it, as did a length of twine attached to a spool. She held it out in the sunlight, and the wind tried to pull it out of her hands. Either that, or the thing was trying to leap into the air. Is that a kite? She finished breathlessly. For a second, she was stunned, and the next second she was moving. Here, hold this. Hold what? I tried, but I didn't get to finish before she shoved the spool into my hands. Hold the ends of it, so the twine can release, she instructed, standing up and hurrying away from me, the kite in her hand. The string tightened, and then the spool spun. I gripped down on it. No, let it go a bit, Hermione called back. I don't... I tried, but she wasn't listening. She pulled on the kite again, and I let the twine spin. Then she tossed the kite straight into the air. The wind caught it and yanked hard on the string. I braced myself and held on, and the little green diamond leapt up and began dancing in the end of the string like a fish on a hook. Ha! I let out. See? Hermione crowed, racing back to me and then spinning around to gaze up at the kite. Perfect wind for it. Is this supposed to be some sort of a challenge, Granger? I asked, lifting an eyebrow, because as far as I can see, a person just holds onto the string and... That moment, the kite swooped low, and though I bit my tongue and jerked back on the string, the kite twisted and drove straight into the ground. Hermione just laughed more. Yes, Malfoy, the challenge is to keep it in the air. I sputtered something offensive, but I wasn't coherent, and she didn't hear me. She was already darting forward to pick up the kite again. This time, when she threw it over her head, I focused on keeping the thing in the air for more than 3 seconds, rather than forming something glib and sarcastic to say. Then, when I'd succeeded in that regard for several minutes, I'd forgotten my sarcasm, and several minutes after that, I almost started to enjoy myself. Hermione. I lay on my back in the willow room, gazing up at the twinkly lights, feeling exhausted for the first time in a while. I let my eyes drift shut, feeling the corners of my mouth lift. I'd seen Draco smile today, just briefly, when he'd first seen the kite take off. Yes, it was a flash, an instant, but it was an instant of unguardedness, and if I could build those up, perhaps into a few minutes of vulnerability, I might be able to get in past his armor and discover what I needed to learn about Katie Bell, and the reasons he had been skulking around the castle all year. Why he had been crying in the bathroom. I took a short breath and set my jaw. I needed to do this more often. I needed to remind myself what I was doing here. It was so easy to forget about the world outside this room, forget about the passage of time. What had Draco called it in the beginning? Neverland? Perhaps he was more right than he'd realized. And Draco was proving to be a conundrum. The longer I studied him, and that was taking a great toll on my limited patience, he both repelled and intrigued me more. He struck an intimidating figure when he walked, though he seemed to be unaware of it. His height was part of it, and the swing of his shoulders was another. When he was especially confident and angry or irritated, his stride carried a sweep with it, as when he charged right after that hippogriff in the middle of class. And then his face. All his expressions were vivid, keen, and he never looked anywhere without purpose, least of all at me. He had a wicked, icy black glare, the lash of which I had felt often recently, and when he sneered and rolled his eyes, it made me feel 2 inches tall. Either that, or it made me feel like slapping him. It was taking all of my willpower to keep up with the cheerful demeanor, and not let his constant negativity get to me. It was making me so tired. But then, at other times, when I caught him just looking at the sky, his brow smoothed and his eyes clear, I saw something different. No, not different. He was the same, cunning and snarky and lofty, but he was more. And then, of course, there was the memory of the blood all over his hands, and the beat of his heart against the side of my head. I turned over, my forehead going tight. "Can't you go to sleep?" Draco complained from over the clock. "I'm trying," I bit back, but there was a silence a moment. Then two soft things landed on me. I sat up and twisted to face him. Then I realized his blue blanket and his Slytherin pillow lay on top of me. "Don't you want these?" I asked, taking the pillow in both hands. He didn't look up. He was engrossed in one of the books. "No, I'm trying to read," he said, and I saw he was leaning back on the white pillow. "Okay," I said. I hesitated. "Thank you." He glanced at me a second, then nodded once and looked back at his book. I took the pillow, adjusted it, and laid down, then drew the blanket over me and up around my shoulders. I gazed at him beneath the clock. I drew in a deep breath. I blinked. I could smell him on the pillow. His cologne. It was an elegant yet masculine scent, like pine, that I hadn't really noticed before. I closed my eyes and shifted onto my back so the smell wouldn't be as close. I glanced at him again. The light in here wasn't all that good for reading. Could he see well enough? I doubted it. What he needed was a... Didn't even finish my thought, and a little golden light came from up in the boughs, drifted down, and then sat in the air just above Draco's right shoulder. I suppressed a smile as I watched it illuminate the side of his face and the pages he was reading. He didn't even notice. For a moment my eyes rested on the little green kite, quite battered now, that lay between us. I sighed, tucked the blanket in around me, and found myself drifting off to sleep without any song at all.